A satellite launched by humans fell due to a malfunction. This satellite carried a large number of viruses, which were actually spores of monsters. Once these spores hit the ground, they rapidly bred a multitude of monsters that quickly took over the region in the Middle East, where the satellite had crashed. Owing to the strategic importance of the Middle East, the United States promptly sent military forces for investigation. The US initially used aircraft for targeted elimination, but this approach caused significant civilian casualties, leading to public outrage and the formation of a resistance army against the US. Frater, a member of the US military, along with 2 friends, joined the armed forces and was deployed to the monster-infested region in the Middle East. During a mission, Frater encountered extraterrestrial monsters for the first time. His helicopter nearly got shot down by one of these creatures. Frater then called for fighter jet support, which successfully annihilated the group of ground monsters. After completing this task, Frater returned to the camp to report to his superior, Forrest. Forrest then assigned Frater another task, to patrol the local area for security. During the patrol, Frater noticed that the local adults seemed to harbor an unwelcoming attitude towards him, whereas the children interacted with them amicably. One night, while conducting a routine investigation, Frater met a local farmer whose family and dog had been killed by the US military, filling him with hostility towards the US forces. In the farmer's eyes, the US soldiers were no different from the alien monsters. When an alien monster appeared and the soldiers opened fire, killing it instantly, Frater observed that although these alien creatures fit the physical profile of monsters, their attack power seemed significantly lacking. Forrest was dissatisfied with this operation, criticizing the soldiers for lowering their guard around the children, which could be fatal in a combat situation. This left Frater feeling dejected. After multiple missions, Frater had been patrolling the area for nearly 4 months. After patrolling for security, Frater finally received a more challenging mission to search for a missing US military team that might have engaged with monsters before disappearing. Under the leadership of his superior, Forrest, Frater traveled by vehicle to the incident area. In the desert terrain, Frater often saw monsters sprinting around, and their vehicle even hit one. Since they hadn't encountered any lethal threats, the soldiers let their guard down, thinking the mission was not particularly dangerous. However, the first vehicle in their convoy soon hit a landmine trap. The vehicle was destroyed, and the survivors who jumped out encountered another landmine, resulting in severe leg injuries. At that moment, they were ambushed by a resistance army aiming to eliminate the passing US forces. The remaining US soldiers fought back while helping the injured to safety. One of Frater's friends succumbed to his injuries, and the resistance army, with superior numbers, gradually surrounded the remaining US forces. Just as the resistance army was about to overrun them, the airstrike called by Forrest finally arrived, and a drone came to assist. The remaining US forces took advantage of the chaos to evacuate. Only 4 members of the original US team survived the ambush, including one of Frater's friends, Incalar. While resting in a building after fleeing, one of the survivors suddenly died, and Incalar was shot shortly after. They then realized that a sniper was targeting them from a distance, and soon, a large group of resistance fighters followed in vehicles. Knowing they couldn't escape the encirclement, Forrest and the few remaining soldiers chose to surrender. The resistance forces tied them up, and without medical treatment, Incalar soon died from blood loss. The consecutive deaths of his friends deeply affected Frater, and Forrest was also grief-stricken. As night fell, the area where Frater was captured became active with monsters. The arrival of the monsters at night caused the resistance army to hastily retreat. As prisoners, Frater and Forrest took advantage of the chaos to kill their guards and regain their freedom. At this point, the 2 soldiers, Frater and Forrest, needed to escape the territory of the resistance army. During their escape, Frater killed the soldier responsible for his friend's death. Despite the series of events, the US military team was now reduced to just 2 soldiers. Nevertheless, Forrest still chose to complete the rescue mission. After a long period of fighting and fleeing, the 2 were in desperate need of water. By chance, they came across a car emitting thick smoke. Approaching the vehicle to check for water, they found no water source but discovered a child who had survived the car explosion. Frater believed the child needed treatment, while Forrest thought it was too late to save him, and that it would be kinder to reduce his suffering. The 2 were debating how to treat the boy when another armed group appeared. This group was a local militia, and seeing Frater and Forrest's intention to save the child, they assumed the soldiers had no ill intentions and rescued the child and the 2 American soldiers. taking them back to their village. In the village, the child received treatment, and Frater and Forrest got the water they needed. The villagers appreciated Frater's actions, and the children warmly welcomed the unexpected American soldiers. Moreover, a woman named Ara from the village fell in love with Frater. One night, Frater and Ara encountered a monster that did not show any aggressive behavior, but merely spread more spores. These spores began to grow on the ground, yet there was no hostility between humans and the monster at that moment, as if both were enjoying a peaceful quiet. Forrest, seeing Frater falling in love with Ara, beat him up, thinking Frater was out of his mind since the mission was not yet complete. He then dragged Frater away to continue the mission. Soon after, they encountered another child holding a small monster, which Frater believed was the result of the spores spread by the previous night's monster. After observing the monster's behavior the previous night, Frater concluded that humans and monsters could coexist peacefully, so he chose to release the small monster back into nature. The small monster indeed did not attack Frater and his group afterwards. Frater and his partner continued their journey and encountered several children armed with US military weapons in a new village. The children led Forrest to a separate room where the bodies of 4 people, the very ones Forrest was sent to rescue, lay deceased. Forrest became extremely agitated and held the homeowner at gunpoint, demanding to know how these 4 died. Due to the language barrier, neither side could understand the other, and Forrest's emotions spiraled out of control, leading him to fatally shoot a civilian who was trying to explain. Forrest, now in a state of mental disarray, began to question why he was in the Middle East and, receiving no response, started shooting civilians. Seeing the situation becoming uncontrollable, Frater had no choice but to shoot and injure Forrest. The wounded Forrest finally calmed down, but his confused state of mind did not recover. Severely injured, Forrest continued to question his presence in the Middle East until he succumbed to his injuries. After Forrest's death, a helicopter appeared nearby. It was the US military coming to their aid. Before boarding the rescue helicopter, Frater saw numerous gigantic monsters in the distance, likely grown from the spores spread the previous night. Although these monsters were large and strange, they had never attacked humans. It was the US military that had painted them as dangerous. Not only the monsters, but also the civilians in the Middle East held no hostility towards the US forces. It was the continuous bombings by the US that had incited local resentment. Forrest himself did not harbor any animosity towards the Middle Eastern civilians. He had merely wanted to stay home with his family. This revealed the absurdity of the war, born out of misunderstandings, creating hostility on both sides, involving and causing tragedies for many innocents. Monsters, the Dark Continent, although featuring extraterrestrial monsters, is essentially a realistic anti-war film. The term monsters refers first to the alien creatures and secondly to the soldiers who lose their sanity in war. War turns humans into monsters, twisting human nature through repeated missions. Seeing a young and passionate soldier, Frater feels both admiration and sorrow, knowing that one day he might become like him. This realization is a rare display of his remaining humanity. Frater joined the war to protect his daughter back in the US, but the war turned him into a monster that even his daughter would fear.